Hello, everyone. This week's lesson, we're talking about how Paul was bold for Christ. And if you'll let me, I'd like to read you a story from the book called Missionary Stories with the Millers. And the Millers were missionaries in Africa during the 1900s. And they've got some really amazing stories in this book. And this one that I'd like to read to you is called A Dustpan for Jesus. It's about how a young man was bold for Christ. If you'll listen along, we'll learn together. Chapter 24, A Dustpan for Jesus. Preacher, may I go with you to the mission? The young African boy begged. I want to hear about Jesus and how to read the Bible like you do. Raymond Bush, the missionary, looked in surprise at the earnest face of the boy. What is your name, my boy? He asked. And do you have permission from your parents and your chief to go along with me? I am called Tesese, the boy replied. Will you take me if I'm allowed to go? The missionary promised that he would, and so the next morning a very happy Tesese followed along with Raymond Bush and his men. It was a long way from Tesese's village in the interior of Africa back to the mission station. For 9 weeks, the group of men and boys traveled through jungles, plains, and desert sand. The days were long and tiring, but very exciting to a young boy who had never been far from his home village before. The wooded lands were full of monkeys, giraffe, and elephants. On the plains, lions stalked herds of zebra and antelopes, while ostriches ran awkwardly through the tall grass. Clumps of thorn bushes were everywhere. The Africans called these wait-a-bit thorns because when you were caught in them, your friends had to wait a bit. Nighttime was scary for a young boy. Their camp had to be surrounded by a ring of fire all through the night for protection from wild animals and mosquitoes. The men would cut timber, pile it all around the camp, and set fire to it. During the night, the fire was kept burning, and although lions roared in the darkness outside, the travelers within the circle were safe. At last, they arrived at the mission station where Raymond Bush lived. Now Tesese could finally go to school. He loved to learn. Eagerly, his quick mind drank in the stories of Jesus and all the truths of God's word. When he was not at school learning, he would follow the missionaries around at their work, asking questions. Tesese, you ask more questions in an hour than I can answer in a week, Raymond said one day. But Tesese was not embarrassed. There were so many new things to see and learn, he just had to ask questions. What is that thing you are sweeping the dirt into? He asked Mrs. Bush one morning as she swept the floor of her hut. This is called a dustpan, the missionary's wife replied. Thank you, called the boy as he hurried past on his way to school. Slipping into his seat, he waited for class to begin. As soon as the teacher called his name, Tesese rose to his feet. Teacher, he told the missionary solemnly, I want you and everyone to know my name is no longer Tesese, the animal which runs through the woods. Now that I am a Christian, my name shall be Dustpan forever. Dustpan, the teacher exclaimed, surprised. Why ever would you want your name to be Dustpan? Because, teacher, the boy replied earnestly, I was just passing your house and saw your wife sweeping. With that tool called a dustpan in her hand, she carried all the dirt out of your hut with it. I want to be a dustpan too, so that when I go home, I may carry out the dirt from the lives of my father, my family, and all my friends. I want to be a dustpan for Jesus. From that day on, the boy could often be heard praying that God would make him a good dustpan for his service. Soon, he had brought 5 of his friends to Jesus, and the 6 Christian boys together witnessed to others. Time passed, and one day, Raymond Bush was preparing to take another evangelistic journey into the North Country where Dustpan's village lay. Now I can go home and tell my family the good news about Jesus, Dustpan said joyfully. No, Dustpan, the missionary objected. You are still young. You should stay here in school for a few years yet, and my wife will need you to help her while I am gone. Preacher, I must go now, cried Dustpan. There is no time to lose. Even now, my family could be dying without Jesus. My father could be killed in a tribal fight. My mother might be eaten by lions while working in the garden. My brothers and sisters may die and never hear of Jesus in time. All right, my boy, the missionary relented. You shall go along, and may God bless you as you try to be a dustpan to your people. Once more, Dustpan traveled the weary and dangerous miles through the African jungles, following elephant and hippopotamus trails. Through burning desert sands, the caravan plodded until Dustpan's feet were sore and covered with blisters. One night, the boy lay moaning with pain as the missionary tried to treat his blistered feet. You cannot walk any farther with such sore feet, my boy, Mr. Bush said sadly. I will leave you here with the chief of this village and pay him to care for you until your feet heal. You can go along with me to your village next year. No, I must go with you now, Dustpan insisted. My father may be killed and tried fighting. My mother might be eaten by lions while she works in the garden. My brothers and sisters might die before next year and never hear of Jesus. So when the travelers went on the next morning, the determined Dustpan came limping along with them. The trail that morning led through miles of tall grass called elephant grass. Suddenly, as the path took them around a sharp bend, a lioness sprang from a clump of grass stems. In one awful instant, she pounced upon a servant who was carrying a box of supplies for the missionary. With a cry, the man dodged, and the lion's paw struck the box on his back, sending it rolling into the tall grass. Jerking up the shotgun that he carried, Mr. Bush fired. In the excitement, he missed. Hissing horribly, the lioness disappeared into the tall grass. Feeling shaky but thankful after their narrow escape, the missionary party continued on. Their water supply was low, so they were in a hurry to get to the river. At last, in the late afternoon, they reached their goal. As his men pitched their tents and refilled their water bottles, the missionary counted them. One was missing. "Where's Dustpan?" he called in alarm. "Dustpan is not with us. When did you see him last?" But nobody knew. "Maybe the lioness got him," one man ventured. "If he's out there in the grass alone, he's been eaten by now," others muttered. "There's no use going back to find him." "What shall we do, Lord?" cried Raymond, falling to his knees in prayer. "I've already had 2 men killed by lions during my travels," he thought. "I don't want to lose Dustpan. Lord, I know that you can do anything," he prayed. "Please protect this boy somehow and save him for the work he wanted to do." As the missionary paced around and around in the camp, he strained his eyes, searching for any sign of movement among the tall grasses. Far away, a lion roared his horrible, coughing roar, and a shiver went down the spines of all the listeners. The sun was sinking behind the hills when the anxious missionary finally saw the grasses waving along the paths where they had traveled. Running forward eagerly, he cried, "Dustpan, are you safe, my boy?" Staggering wearily out of the elephant grass, Dustpan lifted his hands in triumph. "God kept me alive to tell my parents about Jesus." When the relieved missionary reached his young friend, though, he saw a sad sight. Even though Dustpan's sore feet had been bandaged and padded with dry grass, the blisters had burst as he walked, and his feet were now bleeding with every step he took. It was no wonder he had not been able to keep up with the others. Raymond Bush called for his men, and together they carried the tired boy the rest of the way into camp. Kneeling before him, the missionary did what he could for poor Dustpan's bloody feet. "Lord," he prayed humbly, "what a love for souls is in this boy's heart. He is a better missionary than I am. Help me to be more like Dustpan." When Dustpan finally reached his home village, the battle had only begun. His father was one of the most famous witch doctors in that part of Africa, and usually killed more than 600 people every year. In his heathen cruelty, he put to death anyone who offended him by poisoning them, burying them alive, or tying them to anthills and letting the ants eat them. Was there any use in hoping that such an evil man would become a Christian? But Dustpan's faith and love won the hearts of his whole family, even that father. Both his parents His 3 sisters and all 5 brothers were converted and became Christians. Then Dustpan began to share the gospel with others in his village. When Raymond Bush returned the following year, he found 364 new Christians waiting to be baptized, all through the witness of one young boy. What a lot of sin, darkness, and dirt had been carried out of that corner of Africa by one dustpan in the hands of Jesus. What an awesome story. What are you prepared to do to be bold for Jesus? Would you join me in a quick prayer? Father God, thank you so much for the example of Dustpan, and thank you for the courage that he showed in reaching his village. And Father, I pray that you would be with us as we consider how we can be bold for you like Paul in the world around us. Pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.